By 2006, MySpace was still the largest social network in the world. Traffic remained enormous. Advertising revenue continued growing. The company was attracting millions of visitors every day. From the outside, everything appeared healthy. Inside the company, however, the priorities were changing. News Corporation had invested hundreds of millions of dollars into MySpace. Shareholders expected results. Executives expected results. Advertisers expected results. The pressure to generate revenue increased every quarter. For a startup, growth had once been the goal. Now growth alone was not enough. The business needed to monetize. And quickly. Advertising became the answer. Then more advertising. Then even more advertising. Marketing partnerships expanded. Promotional placements expanded. Revenue targets expanded. Every available space on the website became valuable. The homepage became more crowded. Profile pages became heavier. User experience became increasingly complicated. At first, the changes seemed small. One advertisement here. One sponsorship there. A new marketing campaign. A new promotional feature. Individually, none of them looked dangerous. Together, they slowly changed the platform. Many users couldn't explain exactly what felt different. They simply noticed that the site felt slower, busier, less enjoyable. The experience that had once felt personal was beginning to feel commercial. Inside MySpace, not everyone agreed with the direction. Some employees worried that the company was sacrificing long-term product quality for short-term revenue. Others argued that growth had to be converted into profit while the opportunity still existed. The debates became more frequent. The tension became more visible. And all the while, Facebook kept improving. Not dramatically. Not through major redesigns. But through hundreds of small improvements. Cleaner pages. Faster performance. Simpler navigation. A more consistent experience. The contrast between the two platforms became increasingly obvious. MySpace looked larger. Facebook looked better organized. MySpace felt louder. Facebook felt easier to use. Neither difference seemed decisive. Yet together, they were changing how users perceived both companies. The most dangerous problems rarely arrive all at once. They accumulate quietly. One decision, then another, then another, until eventually, the company no longer resembles the one people originally loved. By the end of 2006, MySpace still appeared dominant. Traffic numbers suggested success. Revenue numbers suggested success. Market analysts still favored success. But underneath those numbers, something important was changing. The company was becoming better at serving advertisers and slightly worse at serving users. At the time, almost nobody believed that distinction would determine the future. A few years later, it would determine everything. In September 2006, Facebook made one of the most important decisions in its history. The company opened registration to everyone. For years, Facebook had been exclusive. First Harvard, then Ivy League schools, then universities, then high schools. Its growth had been controlled, deliberate, careful. Many people questioned the strategy. Why limit growth when competitors were expanding as quickly as possible? Why turn away potential users? Why make joining more difficult? Mark Zuckerberg saw things differently. He believed trust mattered. Identity mattered. The network needed to feel real. And for a while, that strategy worked. Facebook built strong communities, highly engaged users, and a reputation for authenticity. Now the company was ready for something bigger. Anyone over the age of 13 with an email address could join. The gates were open. At first, the change seemed insignificant. MySpace was still much larger, much more famous, and much more deeply connected to popular culture. Most industry analysts assumed Facebook was simply trying to catch up. But the effects appeared almost immediately. College students invited friends. Friends invited family members. Family members invited coworkers. Coworkers invited other coworkers. The network expanded outward in every direction. And because Facebook was built around real identities, every new connection strengthened the value of the platform. This was the power of network effects. The more people joined, the more useful Facebook became. And the more useful Facebook became, the more people wanted to join. The cycle reinforced itself. Month after month, quarter after quarter, the numbers kept moving in the same direction. Facebook grew, then grew faster, then faster still. Meanwhile, MySpace executives continued focusing on traffic, advertising, partnerships, revenue. The company still appeared successful, but something important had changed. For the first time, Facebook was no longer chasing MySpace. It was gaining on it. Inside Silicon Valley, investors began paying closer attention. Technology reporters began paying closer attention. Even MySpace employees began paying closer attention. The competition that once seemed hypothetical was becoming real. And unlike previous challengers, Facebook wasn't trying to be MySpace. It wasn't copying MySpace. It wasn't competing on customization, or music, or entertainment. It was building a different kind of social network entirely. One built around identity, relationships, and simplicity. The industry had spent years debating whether Facebook could become relevant. Now a new question emerged. Could MySpace stop it? For the first time since Friendster collapsed, the future of social networking no longer seemed certain. For a long time, the warning signs were easy to ignore. MySpace still had millions of users, still generated enormous traffic, still attracted advertisers. From a distance, everything looked normal. But social networks are not judged from a distance. They are judged one user at a time, one friend at a time, one login at a time. And that was where the real problem began. At first, people didn't leave MySpace. They added Facebook. Many users maintained accounts on both platforms. MySpace remained the place for music, photos, self-expression. Facebook became the place for classmates, co-workers, and everyday communication. The two networks coexisted for a while. Then something subtle happened. People began checking Facebook first. Not because they loved it more, not because it was more exciting, but because that was where their friends were becoming active. One friend joined, then another, then an entire group. The shift was almost invisible, until suddenly it wasn't. A college student might notice that conversations were happening on Facebook instead of MySpace. A band might notice that fans were sharing links through Facebook instead of MySpace bulletins. A young professional might notice that coworkers were exchanging Facebook profiles instead of MySpace pages. No single moment caused the migration. There was no announcement, no dramatic collapse, no day when everyone decided to leave. The movement happened gradually, then all at once. Every social network depends on a simple promise. Your friends are here. The moment that promise becomes stronger somewhere else, everything changes. MySpace still had users, but Facebook increasingly had relationships. And relationships are harder to replace than features. Inside MySpace, executives watched the numbers carefully. Some metrics remained strong. Traffic remained high. Advertising revenue continued flowing. But other numbers told a different story. Engagement patterns were shifting. New user growth was slowing. The youngest users were increasingly choosing Facebook first. The momentum that had once belonged entirely to MySpace was moving elsewhere. And momentum is one of the most valuable assets in technology. Once it changes direction, it rarely turns back. The migration accelerated throughout 2007 and 2008. Students left. Professionals left. Brands followed. Advertisers followed. Media attention followed. The same network effect that had once helped MySpace defeat Friendster was now helping Facebook defeat MySpace. History was repeating itself. Only this time, MySpace was on the wrong side of it. The company that had once seemed untouchable was discovering a difficult truth. In social media, users don't leave because a platform disappears. A platform disappears because users leave. And once enough people begin walking toward the exit, even giants can fall surprisingly fast. By 2008, the internet looked very different from the one MySpace had helped create. Facebook was growing rapidly. New users arrived every day. Investors were paying attention. The press was paying attention. And for the first time, MySpace was no longer the center of the conversation. The company still had enormous traffic. Millions of people continued visiting the site. Millions continued logging in. From the outside, the numbers still appeared impressive. But inside the technology industry, perceptions were changing. A few years earlier, ambitious startups wanted to become the next MySpace. Now they wanted to become the next Facebook. That shift mattered. Because technology companies do not live on traffic alone. They live on momentum. And momentum had changed sides. The difference became increasingly visible. When new social media features appeared, people expected Facebook to introduce them. When investors discussed the future, they discussed Facebook. When journalists wrote about the next chapter of the internet, they wrote about Facebook. MySpace was still large, but it was no longer leading. And for a company that had once defined online culture, that loss of influence was devastating. Inside News Corporation, concerns were growing. The acquisition that once looked visionary now looked uncertain. Executives demanded answers. Traffic reports were analyzed. Strategies were revised. Leadership changes followed. The company experimented with redesigns. New features, new partnerships, new advertising initiatives. Each effort aimed to reverse the trend. None of them changed the direction. The problem was no longer technical. It was emotional. Users no longer felt excited about MySpace. And excitement is one of the hardest things to recover once it disappears. Meanwhile, Facebook continued benefiting from a powerful cycle. More users attracted more users. More activity attracted more activity. The network effect strengthened itself. Every month made the gap harder to close. Then came the moment many observers had predicted. Facebook surpassed MySpace. The exact numbers varied depending on the measurement, but the conclusion was unmistakable. A new leader had emerged. For years, MySpace had represented the future. Now it represented the past. The transition happened so gradually that many users barely noticed it. Until one day they did. The conversations had moved. The attention had moved. The culture had moved. And once culture leaves a platform, it rarely comes back. By the end of the decade, MySpace was no longer fighting for dominance. It was fighting for relevance. The social network that once seemed impossible to replace had discovered the same truth that Friendster learned before it. In technology, being first is powerful, but staying first is much harder. And MySpace was running out of time. As MySpace struggled to keep pace with Facebook, one of its most recognizable figures was quietly preparing to leave. Tom Anderson had become one of the most familiar faces on the internet. Millions of users had seen his profile. Millions had added him as their first friend. For an entire generation of internet users, Tom and MySpace felt inseparable. Yet behind the scenes, the company was changing. The startup culture that helped build MySpace was fading. Corporate structures were expanding. Meetings multiplied. Layers of management increased. The business was becoming more complex. And increasingly, it no longer resembled the company that Tom had helped create. By 2009, Tom stepped away from MySpace. Unlike many technology founders, he did not launch a public campaign. He did not criticize former colleagues. He did not spend years fighting for control. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public feud, no attempt to reclaim the platform. Instead, he simply moved on. For many users, the departure felt symbolic. Tom had always represented a different version of the internet. A version that felt informal, creative, and surprisingly human. The internet of the early 2000s was far from perfect. Pages were messy. Profiles were chaotic. Technology often broke. But many users remember it with affection, because it felt personal. And in many ways, Tom became associated with that feeling. As Facebook expanded and social media became increasingly professionalized, the era that created MySpace was disappearing. The internet was becoming larger, more organized, more efficient, and far more valuable. But it was also becoming something else. More structured, more standardized, less experimental. Whether that change was good or bad depended on who you asked. What mattered was that the change was happening, and there was no going back. Years later, Tom would occasionally appear in interviews. Travel photos would appear online. Articles would ask what happened to MySpace's most famous friend. The answers were often surprisingly ordinary. He traveled. He took photographs. He lived quietly. In an industry obsessed with growth, competition, and influence. Tom's story ended differently. He did not become the richest founder. He did not build the largest company. He did not win the social media war. Yet unlike many people in technology, he seemed comfortable walking away. And perhaps that is one reason people still remember him. Not because he conquered the internet, but because he represented a brief moment when the internet felt smaller, friendlier, and a little more human. As Tom left MySpace behind, the platform continued its decline. But the ideas that helped make it famous were about to appear somewhere else, in ways few people noticed at the time. By the early 2010s, most discussions about MySpace focused on what went wrong. The company lost users, lost relevance, lost the social media war. And in technology, losing often becomes the only part people remember. But that version of the story is incomplete, because MySpace got a lot of things right. In some cases, it got them right before anyone else, long before creators talked about building personal brands. MySpace encouraged people to build identities online, long before influencers became an industry. Musicians, artists, photographers, and performers were using MySpace to attract audiences, long before streaming platforms dominated music discovery. Fans were finding new bands through MySpace profiles. The idea felt normal today. At the time, it felt revolutionary. For decades, musicians depended on record labels, radio stations, and music television. MySpace offered another path. A band could upload songs, build a following, and connect directly with listeners, without permission from anyone. Many artists who later became successful built early audiences there. The platform helped demonstrate something important. The internet could become a distribution system, not just for information, but for culture. That idea would eventually influence YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, TikTok, and countless other platforms. MySpace also understood something about self-expression that later social networks often ignored. People wanted their online spaces to feel personal, messy, unique, recognizable. The platform gave users extraordinary freedom, sometimes too much freedom, but freedom nonetheless. Years later, elements of that idea would reappear in unexpected places. Personal channels, creator pages, custom content feeds, digital identities built around individual personalities. The technology changed. The underlying desire remained. Even Facebook eventually borrowed concepts that had already appeared on MySpace. The same was true for many other platforms. Features evolved. Interfaces evolved. Business models evolved. Yet traces of MySpace continued appearing across the internet, often in ways users never noticed. That is one of the strange realities of technology history. A company can lose its market, lose its audience, and still influence the future. Because influence does not always follow ownership. The companies that define an era are not always the companies that dominate the next one. Sometimes they simply introduce ideas that everyone else later adopts. MySpace was one of those companies. It did not build the future exactly as it imagined, but parts of that future were built using ideas it helped popularize. And that legacy turned out to be far more durable than the website itself. Today, most people no longer visit MySpace. Many younger internet users have never created an account. Some have never even seen the website. The platform that once seemed impossible to avoid has become a piece of internet history, a digital artifact from another era. And yet, people still talk about it, not because it survived, but because they remember how it felt. Ask someone who used MySpace in the mid-2000s, and the conversation rarely begins with business models, or market share, or advertising revenue. Instead, they remember songs, profile pages, friends, Late nights spent customizing layouts, discovering new bands, learning basic HTML just to change the color of a page. The memories are surprisingly personal. That alone makes MySpace unusual. Most technology platforms are remembered for what they did. MySpace is often remembered for how it felt. It belonged to a specific moment in internet history. A moment before algorithms controlled most attention. Before social media became a professional industry. Before creators tracked engagement metrics. Before every platform optimized itself around retention and monetization. The internet was smaller, less polished, sometimes frustrating, often chaotic, but also surprisingly creative. People experimented, built things, shared things, and left their fingerprints everywhere. MySpace reflected that world. In many ways, it amplified it. The platform encouraged people to create rather than simply consume, to customize rather than conform, to participate rather than observe. Not every idea worked. Many features disappeared. Many designs aged badly. But the spirit behind them mattered. As the internet matured, that spirit became harder to find. Today's platforms are more efficient, faster, smarter, more powerful, but they are also more standardized, more optimized, more predictable. The internet gained scale. It lost some spontaneity. Whether that trade was worth it depends on who you ask. What is certain is that millions of people experienced the transition firsthand. And MySpace sat directly in the middle of it. In the end, Facebook won the social networking war. Its influence became global. Its scale became historic. Its impact reshaped the internet. That part of the story is well known. What people forget is that Facebook entered a world MySpace helped create. A world where online identity mattered. A world where friendships existed on screens. A world where culture moved through social networks. MySpace did not invent every one of those ideas, but it helped bring them into everyday life. And once that happened, the internet could never go back. Perhaps that is why the story still matters. Not because MySpace won, not because it survived, but because for a brief period, it showed millions of people a new way to live online. The website faded. The influence remained. And somewhere in an old forgotten account, a favorite song still waits to autoplay. A profile still exists. A comment still survives. A small reminder of a version of the internet that disappeared long ago. But not completely, because pieces of it are still everywhere, hidden beneath the platforms that replaced it. Facebook won the social network war, but MySpace helped invent the battlefield. That is the unspoken system.